Thanks for inviting me into your home, long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed rec room with the simulated wood paneling, electric fireplace, and the painting of dogs playing poker, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Dr. Al Proffit is with us this hour to discuss some of his paranormal investigations, haunted houses, a haunted battleship, and one supposed possessed individual. Dr. Proffit is a recently retired professor from the University of North Carolina system. He's lived in the Appalachian Mountains his entire life and was born and raised in the southern coal fields of West Virginia. He graduated with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Marshall University. He earned his doctorate from West Virginia University in 1990. He's been a professor in 3 universities, superintendent of schools in 2 states, a school principal, guidance counselor, assistant principal, teacher, and coach. He's an award-winning singer-songwriter and has appeared on stage with American jazz icons Dizzy Gillespie and James Moody. In his senior year of high school, he was offered but turned down an apprenticeship with the American Wind Symphony Orchestra. He studied the psychical sciences since completing his high school project on ghosts. Dr. Al Proffit, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
I am doing very well, Richard, and I hope you are as well.
Likewise. You have had, to say the least, a varied career in music, in education, and in the paranormal, and some might find those intersections rather unusual. Talk to me about how that came to be, education and the paranormal.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess as so many paranormal investigators say, they were raised in a haunted house, and the same would be said for me. So I had that experience, and I had parents who didn't try to tell me that I was crazy, but they had experiences as well, and they taught me 2 basic lessons with this, and the first one has always been important and a central part of my life, is that you treat everybody with dignity and respect, regardless of their skin, regardless of their religion, regardless of anything about them, and to extend that to the paranormal realm as well. So I've never been someone who would try to provoke or, I've heard of people like going somewhere and urinating on a grave. And to me, I just don't think that there's any excuse for that. So anyway, I had that. And then as I was coming through high school, we had to write a major project, as so many do. And so kind of as, tongue-in-cheek, I went and told one of my teachers that I'd like to write on ghosts. And there was a committee of teachers, and I told her not only did I want to write on ghosts, I wanted 3 of my friends to work with me on the paper. So she said, well, she would see and get back to me. So she talked with the other students involved, who were 3 top-notch students. And she then brought me back into her office, and she told me that if I thought that telling her a few ghost stories was going to be a high school project, that was not it. And she actually made sure that I learned certain things that I was still using when I studied my doctorate. One was the scientific method, and one was serious research. So we had to find that place that had the reputation of being haunted and stay there. Maybe overnight, get permission, and all that kind of thing. We were still in school, and so I did that, and we come up with absolutely nothing at that place. But that would change once I graduated from school. But anyway, there was a couple things that in education, you switch over from the paranormal. One of the things that they taught me there was the scientific method, and the other thing that they taught me was the value in working as cooperatively as you could with other people. So it was like peer learning together and using the scientific method. And honestly, those are skills that I used all through college, through my bachelor's, my master's, and especially my doctorate. So I owe them a debt that I don't think I'll ever be able to repay. But the house that we investigated when I was a senior, when we actually would start to go back there, it became a place. It was maybe 25, 30 miles from us, and it was in a state park, and it was actually the first settlement of this area of that county. And so it became a really good place for us to camp. And, we had shelter from, it was a 3-story house. We had shelter from rain and that kind of stuff. The radio was remarkably clear because there was nothing around it as far as as any electricity and all that sort of stuff. And, a lot of people will say when I'm leading up to this, well, I bet you all were doing all kinds of mind-altering things. And we weren't. We were doing 0 mind-altering things. And, but we were there were 4 of us there. It was one night. And, one of the things about studying paranormal as well, I feel, is that so much of it is you're going to, people are not going to believe you, and there's no way that you can prove it. Or people's going to believe it and, and don't even listen to reason on the other side. But anyway, there were 4 of us, and we had returned, and this was the summer, I think, that I'd graduated from high school. And we were staying there, and we always took our stuff up to the 3rd floor. And we took probably what was a bedroom, and there was no furniture or anything like that. So we had sleeping bags. We had the old comb and lantern with the mantle, and we had a radio with us that, just like, I know it might be hard for some of the kids to understand today, but the radio was our link to the world, FM radio and AM, and we had it on the strongest signal that we could get, or the strongest station, and it was out of Richmond, Virginia. And they were playing classical music, which basically we all liked. We were rock and rollers, but we liked that classical music as well. And so it was getting. I also had a tape recorder that was battery driven, and by that time we were just fooling around. This was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and this is one of the things that I will pat my teachers on the back for too. They told me that I had to have more ways to do this, so I saved up and got or to do this. When I say do this, I mean to record to see if you offer some proof. And so we recorded hours of stuff up there, but by that time we were just, we were talking over it and the whole thing. But anyway, this was the sequence of events that happened. And this was my first experience with the paranormal outside of my own home.
This is West Virginia, correct?
This was in West Virginia, yes.
Right. And let me just ask you, how did your parents feel, all of your parents, feel about you going and spending a night in a haunted house?
Well, my parents didn't mind it at all. They thought that they had trained me fairly well, to be respectful. And they also had experience at that time. I was also playing in somewhat of a regionally popular rock and roll band, so they were not used. They were used to me being gone, the entire weekend, because we would just stay where we could. It was the very best possible job, after school summer job that a high school kid could have, is being a drummer for a rock and roll band. And so they were kind of used to that. The other parents, I think, sort of trusted my parents that if I was going to stay there, it must be okay.
Okay.
And my parents knew these 3 guys real well.
Right. So let me ask you also, the reputation
Sure.
of this haunted house. What was the reputation?
The reputation, that's a great question, Richard. The reputation was that there were the house had been abandoned, and it had been somebody very wealthy had owned it, the Bowers family. But anyway, that there was these hunters that were on the property, and they were hunting after the home had been abandoned, and they had a child with them. It was 2 grown men, and I guess they were, in West Virginia that was not unusual because we were taught, how to hunt and all that sort of thing. So they had him there. So when they went in to the home, I don't know if it was as a joke or whatever, and this is just as a folk legend anyway, but they put him in a room that was under the stairs, and they locked him in there. And throughout the evening, he was screaming, "Please, there's something in here with me. Please let me out. Please let me out." And as you can guess, they didn't. And as legend have it, when they opened up the door, the young man had clawed both of his eyes out and bled to death through his eye sockets.
Oh, my.
And, yeah, so, that's, and I remember that because we had to get the background and talk to people to get that story of people who knew of the house, and that was a part of my training as well. But yeah, so that's what we were expecting to find, was the ghost of this little boy. And I don't know really if we ever experienced the little boy or not.
Did you capture EVPs on tape?
No. And here's the thing, though. At that point, I didn't really know much about EVPs. As a matter of fact, I didn't know anything about EVPs, to where there's no sound and then you pick up something on the recorder. We did not know that, and this is well before the internet and everything that we could get to study. It had to be either a book that we bought when we went to a more urban area, or what our library had. So the tape recorder was there to record things that we would hear, that everybody would share, and everybody would be able to hear that. I don't know. Does that make sense?
You didn't understand at the time, and who did, that you would have to play it back and listen through hours of tape, because EVPs, as we now know, aren't necessarily audible to the human ear live. You have to listen back.
Exactly. I don't think that I have ever picked up an EVP that I heard live. It was always you listen back to it, and you're right. If you do an investigation that goes over, a day or two, there is a lot of film to watch. There is a lot of audio to listen to. And, I remember I was talking to Lloyd Arbach once, and he told me that he basically had given up using video because of the tremendous amount of time that you spend. And you can't fast forward through it. You have to watch it, at its speed. And then if you see something, then you slow it down and all those things. So that made a lot of sense to me. And I guess it got to the point that I didn't take as much video after that either, because he was right, and it did take a ton of time to do that. But we didn't know that as kids. When we're 17, 18 years old. And so we were, I remember we were listening to the station in Richmond, Virginia, very clear, and we had the a Coleman lantern going. And for people that might not remember a Coleman lantern, it was, you put a little propane or whatever in the bottom, a little oil, actually, not propane, heating oil, and then it would heat this mantle, and was really quite bright, and you had to pump it, sometimes to keep it there, but it was really, really bright, causing no problems whatsoever. And so one of our friends was pretty much a comedian, and he was going through one of his routines of doing something, I can't even remember, and we were basically just having a good time. And by this point, honestly, we had given up on finding ghosts there. We were just going through the motions, but we were just having a good time. It was the summertime, and we were getting ready to scatter all our different ways, and so we were just kind of having, that nice, just opportunity. And again, we were not drinking. At that time, we'd never even heard of marijuana. At least, if we did, it was on the 6:30 news, and it was just a scourge of the devil, and all that stuff. So we really were not using that, and we had, even though this place would become so, and still is, so damaged by the opioid crisis, but there was none of that. So that's to say that we were all in our clear minds, and at least the three of them were pretty intelligent. And so we were laying there, and two of the guys were laying down in their sleeping bag and just listening to the nonsense that was going on. And actually, I was beginning to bed down too, but the tape recorder just stopped. And I knew that we put really fresh batteries in it, so I got up and fooled with it, and I got it to going again. So we continued on with the nonsense, and then it stopped again. I did the same thing, and then it stopped for the third time. And when it did, these things happened. And this is one of those things, believe it if you will. And I'm to the point that I'm no longer really caring if people believe it, because I was there and it happened to me, and I would have many other things happen to me throughout my career with this. But anyway, the tape recorder quit, the radio faded out, and the front door slammed. I'm not talking about it closed. It slammed, and just as it did that, the Coleman lantern faded down. So now we've lost a Coleman lantern, which is not electric. We've lost a tape recorder and a radio, which both were run by batteries. And so we're in the total dark, and then we hear heavy footsteps. And could we have been punked? You know, I guess anything's possible, but we were way out in nowhere and with this place. And we heard the steps coming up, and it came up the first flight of steps and stopped. And then just as soon as it stopped, the lantern came back on, the tape recorder came back on, and the radio came back on. And so now we're at this point, we've heard the door slam, and if there's somebody or something that has walked up to the first flight, so that means in order for us to get out, we're going to have to go by that, you know. And at that point, there was no question as to whether or not we were going to go out. We were leaving. So it took us 3 trips to get everything up there. That's how comfortable we'd become there, carrying coolers and all that kind of stuff. And we threw everything that wouldn't break out toward the truck, out of the third floor window. And so what we did then is that we had all the other stuff, and we kind of huddled. It looked like kind of a cartoon. We kind of huddled together and went down the steps together just as fast as we possibly could, not stopping to look around and see if we could find some stuff. And it was, quite frankly, one of the most scared that I've ever been. And, you know, I've really tried not to let the paranormal scare me too bad, and this kind of helped, that it would help me get over that type of fear.
Let me ask you, Alvin. So just because
Sure.
you know we're coming up on the break here in a few minutes, how did you do on that term paper that you had to write?
Oh, we got an A. We did. I mean, we did real well. We had one of us was the researcher writer, and one of us was an interviewer, and we did break it up, and we did real well, and I was very pleased with that. I just wish that I still had a copy of that thing.
Just before the break here, let me ask you quickly. Backing up to your childhood, you grew up in a haunted house. So tell me about what that house was like.
Okay, it was, oddly enough, it was built by my parents in 1960, and we'd lived maybe 5 or 6 miles away from it. And the site that they chose and they were able to buy was actually exactly on the same spot as the first person who settled in the county, which was Wyoming County, West Virginia. It was John Smith, and we were right exactly on the same spot. And, you know, they worked land and all those sorts of things. So it was a new house that we had built. There was no standing structure there. So it's kind of hard to explain as to why a brand new house would be haunted, but I hear that story, several times. I've heard it several times since then. And what we didn't know, but there was a big barn that was right across the road. When I say road, I'm talking about a dirt road, and it was right across from us. And what we did not know is that there was a burial ground that was right there. And this was also a place where the Algonquin Indians would come to hunt. They didn't live there because of the rugged terrain. It's really, really rugged in southern West Virginia. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's quite beautiful. It's quite striking, but it's very rugged as well. And so there was somebody that bought a house and was going to build a house beside. They were going to tear down the barn and build them a house there. And then they realized there were graves there. And I remember as a kid watching the excavation folks come in and take those caskets away that they would dig up. And some of them, when we say caskets, they were buried, 150 years ago maybe, and they were buried in a pine box. So sometimes they were taking big scoops of dirt, which I'm assuming had bones and that sort of stuff in it. So that's the only way that we could think of as to why it may have been haunted. And listen, there was other reasons that, we've really never discovered. But it was really interesting, and it was not frightening. This is, as a matter of fact, this is not very original on any part of my family, but we referred to the ghost as Casper. Okay, Casper the friendly ghost. And I think that was part of my parents giving me a very friendly face on something that was paranormal, and, was told to respect it, and those sorts of things, which I did. But we grew up, we had, for example, the most consistently haunted thing that we had is that we had a rocking chair, and where the rocking chair actually comes down into the rocker part, I'm not really sure what you call those, where it rocks back and forth on the wood that's curved. And as you would rock back, it would come out of the hole that the chair was attached to, but the other three would hold tight. And then when you would rock forward, it would snap back in, and you could hear it. And we heard that night after night after night, and you'd walk in the room, nothing, no movement in the chair, no more sounds. And as a matter of fact, back in the day, when they made me go to bed early, I'm basically a night person, but they were struggling with that. But we would just listen, and it would start, and one of my parents, usually my mother, would yell out, "There goes Casper." And so it was kind of actually we did get I did anyway, kind of a warm feeling from having, I was an only child, and sort of become a brother that I never had, or a sister that I never had. And there were many other things. Like we was laying in bed one night, at least I was, and there was this tremendous crash. I mean, it sounded like every pot and pan that we had in the house had just been dumped all at once into the kitchen. And so I got up. This is one of those things, we were still trying to catch it if we could, see it. And so we went down there, and I found my father was already there. And we just looked at each other. There was nothing, absolutely nothing out of place. And it was a loud, loud crash. So anyway, to this day, we haven't been able to figure out what that is.
Dr. Alvin Proffit will share some more of his paranormal experiences and investigations right here on The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away. We are back with Dr. Alvin Proffit. And you were talking about your childhood home, which was located adjacent to an Indian burial ground, and you were sharing some experiences. So you had, I think, one more to add.
Yeah, there's just one more. My mother was a successful beautician and, I guess, entrepreneur. She did have a beauty shop that was inside our house. And, sometimes in this particular area, we would get pretty substantial snows. And we were in one of those. It was falling. I was just as thrilled as I could be because there was no school and all that. And so I was just watching TV in the house. And my mother came in, and she didn't really joke around about things like this, but she said, "I want you to get the largest knife you can find, and I want you to search the house." And she said, "I'll tell you why in a minute." So I checked under the bed, checked everywhere, didn't find anything. And then what had happened was that she was working on one lady's hair, and she was still expecting one more to come in, and they had a divider in the room, and they heard the sliding glass door. It opened and it shut, and both she and the other customer spoke to the person they assumed that it was, and there was nothing that, nobody said anything back. There was no sound, so she stepped around, and there was no one there. But when she went to the door, there were footprints that came up the sidewalk and come in to the door, and then left the door and went out in the yard maybe 20 feet and just stopped. And so you could go, and you saw at the very beginning of where the sidewalk started, you could see that just like somebody had gotten out of a car, but you could see the footprints and in the snow coming up there and then walking away. And so but we never was able to figure it out.
I wanted to jump ahead and talk to you about the U.S. Coast Guard. You were vetted and you were given clearance to study paranormal events on the Battleship U.S. North Carolina in Wilmington. First of all, how does one approach the U.S. Coast Guard to get permission, and what sort of vetting did you go through?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what they actually did or how they vetted me, but the way that it started is that there was a man by the name of Danny Bradshaw, and he's written a book on the haunted USS North Carolina because he was there. He was, in essence, its caretaker and night watchman. I mean, he lived on the boat. And he would tell me things, in the interview, like sometimes it gets so bad that I go out and I sleep in my car, but I sleep at the beginning where the tourists come in so nobody can get by me. But anyway, so I talked to him and asked him if I could have permission. He said, well, he wasn't at a place that he could give me permission. So, and I'm forgetting the ranks, and he gave me names and numbers of people that I should call. And finally I reached a high enough echelon, I guess, within the system of the National Guard. And I'm not sure if it was a captain. I really, truly do not remember. But anyway, that came back through. He called me and said, you got it. You've been vetted, and you're okay. You can come in. So I went over the first night, and Mr. Bradshaw was there. And it was lit up Oh, I mean, it was just beautiful. It's just one of these things that's gorgeous. And my father served in the Navy and was in the entire theater in the Pacific when we were fighting World War II, and on an aircraft carrier. He served on an aircraft carrier. So I had heard stories, about that. And so this is like a kid's dream come true. I mean, it's just two of us on this entire battleship. And so and it was just lit up. I mean, it was like they had lights everywhere, lights on down deck and, up on the deck. And so we were walking around, and he said, well, come on, I'll take you down here. So tourists don't come here, but let me show you down here. And we were walking down, and we began to hear things. When I say things, I don't know what they were, but it was metal on metal. And then we heard footsteps, and he just looked at me, and he said, you see? And then he said, well, come on, we'll pay attention to that, but come on, I'm going to show you something. And then we began to take a few more steps. His light began to go out. And then he looked at me. He said, when this happens, I turn around. And he said, and that's what I'm going to do. You can go if you want to. I turned around with him, and we walked back. And then I just interviewed him, and we sat. We would go up into where the actual captain was when they were piloting the ship. And he said, well, why don't you come back tomorrow night, and we'll do it a little bit more for real. So I said, okay. So we came back, and I'm driving up into the parking lot, a massive parking lot. This is a major tourist attraction as well, and there's no lights on whatsoever on the battleship except for one little portal, one of those little round windows, I guess, portal. And I walked up, and Danny met me at the beginning of the steps, and he said, I got it ready for you tonight. And then he said, I'm not going with you. You have the boat to yourself. And just think, just as a kid, though, I mean, now I'm given the chance to be on a battleship, for goodness sakes. That's enough for the kid in me, the Walter Mitty inside of me. So I'm up, and I have all the equipment I've got. I've got two rather large bags I'm carrying, and I'm setting up meters, and I'm setting up, just whatever I had at that particular time, the cameras and the meters. And then I got my flashlight, and I grabbed one of the bags, which had recorders and that. And so I was headed down, and then I began to go down the steps. You're going straight down from one deck to another deck to another deck. And I was down 6, maybe 7 decks. And it was just so exciting to me. And then all of a sudden, no warning, it didn't, my flashlight just went out completely. It didn't fade. It just went out. Now, if you're 6 decks down in a battleship, there is no source of light unless you have electricity, and there's no electricity. So the only source of light that I had was my equipment. And I thought, well, okay, I can use, one of my cameras had a light on it that it would highlight what it is that you were going to shoot. So I went, and it didn't work. And then as I went through, and I'm doing this in the dark, and I'm trying to find things, nothing worked. Absolutely nothing worked. And except for one little thing, and that was a little bitty flashlight, keychain flashlight that my daughter had given me. And I just, out of hope, it was on my keys, and I pushed that, and that light came on. It was a very, very, very little bit of light. So I just made sure, again, with that light, there's nothing going to work. Nothing did work. So now I'm thinking, if this thing goes out, I'm in a world of hurt. Because cell phones do not reach anywhere. They do not come out of all this metal and stuff. And they told me that. Danny told me, you will find yourself that if you get in trouble on the boat, we won't be able to find you until the morning in all likelihood. We won't even look for you, probably, because we'll still think you're doing your thing. And the dangerous part of that's not necessarily a ghost or something paranormal. If you were walking along, just all of a sudden you come into where those stairs, the ladders go down, and the hatchways, you would fall, and there's nothing but metal. It would pretty much be a death fall. I just can't see any other way around that. Right. But anyway, so I had everything on me, and I finally did find where I could start my climb back up. And I got up to about the second deck, and things began to start coming on again. It was just the weirdest thing. And this is one of the things that made me believe I may never be able to prove this experience to anybody, but I know what happened. And did I make any of it happen? No. I am thankful to be out of there without hurting myself, seriously. So that was in addition to the fun I was having and being on a battleship all by myself, you know, that just really was one of the most enlightening things that I've ever had happen to me.
Aside from the lights going out and your equipment not working, and I presume the batteries were all charged and ready to go, was there any other unusual activity? Did you capture any other evidence?
Now, I was still shooting video at that time, and I had a recorder, a video recorder that was set up in the captain's, or the command deck, and they said that was probably the most haunted place on the boat. And you could hear sounds, but nothing that was, you know, that really sounded ominous, or it's just like pops and cracks. And so I took it back over, and I let Danny hear that and see that. And he said, I hear that all the time, and we cannot explain it, except in that hatchway that I'm talking about, there was an orb. There was actually two orbs that as you look down, and I took the picture that way, that were there. One was beyond the ropes. They had, in certain places, they had safety nets, not ropes, safety nets that would catch someone if they fell. And I took one of those that had an orb under it and then an orb above it. And as well, and I know that there's a real debate in orbs doesn't mean anything because they are simply droplets of water and specks of dust and, you know, things like that. Snow, anything like that is captured and it comes back as an orb, especially dust. And, you know, and most, I think, paranormal investigators buy into that. Certainly the camera companies buy into that. But there are some things that you can't explain because imagine as you're taking flash photography, that digital flash photography, and you have one of those orbs that actually has a trail on it. Do you imagine how fast that piece of dust had to be going to make a trail? I mean, because it's just like, what, 1/500th or a second, 1/500th of a second that the flash goes on and off and the aperture opens and closes. And so I never really did buy into it. I'm one of the few holdouts that thinks that, you know, there's a little bit more here than meets the eye, and we should maybe pay a little more attention to those as we could.
Got to jump in here, Alvin. We're going to take another time out. We'll come back and we'll talk about the time you were recruited by a major church denomination to investigate possible demonic activity. Right here on The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Serra. Don't go away. Dr. Alvin Proffit stays with us. I understand you were involved in an exorcism at one time, or kind of an exorcism. Tell me about that.
I saw a man that I thought might be demonic, but I was not going to, or maybe would had some evil entity attached to him, and I wasn't about to tell him that I can get rid of that. I said, you might need to seek a higher authority on this. And then anyway, I got a call from his wife one night, and she said, you got to please help him. He's in the closet. He's not referring to himself by his right name, and he's saying he's going to kill himself. And will you please talk him down? And so she took the phone in, and Richard, it was like talking to somebody that I'd never seen before. And he was referring to his name as he was a German. He had transformed himself into a German, and maybe Nazi, maybe not. I'm not sure. But at any rate, I began to talk to him, and I couldn't. So then I did something that's very uncharacteristic of me. I said, I want to talk to the entity that's inside of you. And things began to change. And finally, I said, I'm not going to try to talk anybody out of, I'm not going to try to do an exorcism. But anyway, I got to the point that I was afraid for his life. I was afraid he had a lovely family, and I was afraid there was going to be some harm. So I said, I want to speak to that entity. Voice changes. The intonation of his words change. And then after talking to that, for him for a while, I finally said, I demand that you come out of him and leave this family alone. And basically I heard the phone drop and silence. And then he got back on and he said, I'm in the closet. Why am I in the closet? And I thought, well, I got the guy back. But I never, in some ways I heard the phone crackle. And I was just thinking, what if that thing came into me? I don't want to be the priest in The Exorcist where I'd grab hold of it and then jump out the window.
Exactly. Let me just get a quick take from you on this, and that is the idea that from a religious standpoint, Christians and other denominations or other religions may also believe that there's no such thing as ghosts or spirits. What we are witnessing are sometimes referred to as familiars. It's part of a demonic deception. In other words, there are no hauntings. There are only demonic deceptions. How do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, I find that interesting for this reason, and I'll have to actually give Joshua Warren the credit for this. I was doing actually one of his shows with him at one time back when we used to associate and work with each other. And during one of the breaks, he told me, he said, I don't understand that Christians have a hard time believing in the paranormal because the Bible is the most paranormal book that's ever been written. And he's absolutely right about that. He talks about witches. It talks about ghosts. Now, but it doesn't say demons that are ghosts. It says ghosts. And so my thinking on that is that there is so much. They also say we're alone in the universe, which I just can't even fathom that from any direction. If we are God's best work, he probably just should let us be a draft and try it again. Because we have a whole lot of weaknesses as human beings. I do especially. But anyway, I would say to those people is that, I'm studying life after death. That's what I'm studying, and that's what you proposed. That is true. We either go to heaven or we go to hell, but it is life after death. And I said, I'm trying to establish that in a scientific method. And it would not do anything to my faith if I was able to actually sit down and have an apparition talk to me. It would not diminish my faith in that. It just means that God's big enough that as you're dealing with the whole universe, that he could also deal with different dimensions. And maybe when we die, we go to a different dimension. I don't have any idea. I'm not afraid of death, but I don't want to welcome it either. So my response to him, I think, would just be that, just because there's something you don't understand, that doesn't mean that it's demonic. Something that I think is demonic is where you might have two school guys get automatic weapons and go in Columbine High School and blow people away. And that I would, we could talk some evil there, and and all the other things, the kid at Parkway. We could just go through all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I think that in studying this, that Christians would be kind of interested in the fact. And there's a lot of Christians that are interested. As a matter of fact, I have a whole lot of people. When I finally, after Our State magazine, run actually a 4 or 5 page article on me. I had no choice but just to come out and say, yep, that's what I do. My colleagues around me already knew that, and some thinks it's just weird, others, but you think not, but you'd be surprised at the people that will come to you and say, now, you're going to think I'm crazy, but, and then they tell you this, and that just, I take some comfort in that, and, I don't really necessarily think of anybody as crazy. I was taught not to do that as well. Maybe they operate in a different manner that I do. But I think that would be my response to that, is that the Bible is the most paranormal book you can get.
Very well put. All right, Alvin, we'll take one final time out, come back, and talk about some of the places of renown that you've been fortunate enough to investigate, including Loch Ness, Oxford University, the Devil's Stair Steps in North Carolina. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us. We are back with Dr. Alvin Proffit. Lest people think that your investigations have been limited or restricted to Appalachia, you have traveled the globe. Tell me about, for example...
And we went to Scotland. And if I may interject this is one of my thrills of life, too. We went to where there were ghost tours that were going through the underground in Edinburgh, and people might not know what I'm talking about. It's not like underground as in the rock underground or the English underground. It was actually catacombs where people lived during the days of the bloodshed and, of all that was going on in Scotland and Edinburgh at the time. And these people lived their whole lives down there, some of them never seeing the sun. And it was something that I had studied but not really appreciated till actually I took the first tour. And I went to the tour people and I said, I'm an investigator and I'd like to take a look at this. And they said, well, we can't let you be in there by yourself, but what you can do is you get between tours and you can follow one out of their sight, and before the other comes, when you hear them coming, you do that. So I did that on my first night, And then the next night, I came up and I talked to them again. They said, well, listen, why don't you join the last tourist group that's coming through? We will let you be the last person out. And as long as you promise to close and lock the door, I swear to goodness, it sounds like you're going to grandmama's house, but make sure you lock the door when you leave. And just the magnitude of that, once everybody was gone, the silence and the dark and the history that just went on around me. And I was taking pictures, and I got some extremely good light activity, which I mean beams of light that are shooting down. And that was not at all present when, that I saw. But you would see that it was evidently something that was captured by flash, and it was moving at an incredible rate of speed. I caught 2 or 3 of those, and I also caught orbs of different colors. Most of the orbs are like white or pale or gray, but these I captured 1 or 2 that was just really bright green. And so, yeah, I didn't really hear anything, and I didn't see anything with my eye. But just being in the underground of Edinburgh was just an absolute thrill for me.
You are one of the few people that has ever developed and taught a course on psychical science research. You did that at Appalachian State University. Tell me about that
Yes,
course.
Sir. Well, naturally, my field of I guess, expertise or whatever would be educational leadership. But we have a program at App State, which I think is an excellent program, that they have their professors, if they want, it's strictly volunteer, that you can design a course that has all the rigor of being a course that is worthy of being taught at App State, but that you can divide it on, you design it based on something that you like. And naturally I thought, well, I'll give that a shot. And so I wrote up a really scholarly document as to, well, why should we study the paranormal? One was, well, how about people like this, like Carl Jung? He studied the paranormal. William James, he studied the paranormal. And then you could keep going through this list of famous people who believed, and Thomas Alva Edison was actually working on a phone that would reach the dead when he died. That's something, I guess, that they try to keep quiet a little bit. But anyway, I designed the course, did the literature review on the whole thing, and explained why I thought it was necessary, because there's a lot of kids out there now, and they go off on these haunted, we're going to go see if we can see a ghost type of thing. And there is some things that's inherently dangerous about that. And I've been a speaker at middle schools and high schools, and actually other universities, to where I talked about. It's one of the things that I will talk about. But the class also has to be built into the research component. And here is where my high school teachers just come back in spades, where they just said, when I would go in, I'd say, we got to research this. That means you've got to keep records. You've got to find a way to research it. And I let them pick out their particular topic. And but anyway, it's called a first-year seminar, and it's worth 3 hours credit, and it would go toward the degree. So this was actually a class they were taking for their degree as a general elective. And so every time I taught it, it was filled up. People couldn't get into it. And so I just really had a good time teaching that. And, it's like most of the time I taught graduate students who are working on their master's or the EDS specialist degree or their doctorate. And then coming in and teaching who were predominantly freshmen, I got a chance to teach kids who are going, what if? And then you go with the graduate students, and it's more of a theme of it is. This is the way that it is. But anyway, just one quick story on that. I had a young man who was really, really very interested in the course, and he was wanting to get into remote viewing. And I thought, well, that's a great topic to study. So I approved it, and he said, where I'm gonna try to remote view to where my sister lives, and she's in the Coast Guard. And I'm going to try to do that. And then, a couple of weeks went by, and then he came up. He stayed after class. He said, I don't know what to do. He said, I've got a letter from the Coast Guard that said I would cease and desist on studying remote viewing as far as one of their properties are concerned. And so I thought, well, number one, did his sister actually bring it up to one of her superiors? or do they go through all the mail or whatever it was? But he went on to write about spontaneous combustion of humans. But anyway, I thought that was really, really interesting that the Coast Guard jumped in and said no, because as you know, that is something that our military industrial complex has been studying for a while, is how to remote view. And but anyway, I just found that was very amusing.
Yeah, I'm wondering if somehow their psychic spies detected that he was remotely viewing one of their locations. Maybe that's how they found out.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. I have never thought of that. And you could absolutely be right on that. Wouldn't that be something? And that's another thing that I have. If there's a complaint about studying the paranormal, it's that people, organizations, institutions don't tend to share everything that they get, and it's all, that it's just for me. This is going to be for me. And there's not many ways to make a living, studying the paranormal. And I guess I can understand that, but I think that sometimes we are shooting the collective study of the psychical sciences by not cooperating. Like I did with those 3 kids back in high school. I was taught to do that. You cooperate and share. So anyway, that's a fascinating take on that, Richard.
So in conclusion, Alvin, after nearly a lifetime investigating and researching the paranormal, are you any closer to identifying perhaps what might be behind all this?
I think what I am closer to is a peace of mind that I have, because I have verified many times over that it's real. It happens to me. But some of the other things that come into play is Diane Archangel. I don't know if you know of her, or you may have actually interviewed her, but she did some work a few years ago, and she did. She took Carl Jung's work in the 16 different personality types, also called Myers-Briggs, and she administered that to a very large population. And what she got back was that certain, and I won't be able to tell you which one they are, there's 16, different mindsets, but that certain mindsets were more capable of seeing, hearing, or believing in the paranormal as the others. And so I've just always thought that's fascinating. So I think some of the things that I've come up with is the fact that everybody is not going to experience the paranormal. And even if they did, they're going to explain it away because it's not within their paradigm of thinking. And I can understand that. But I think, just from my guess, is it's entities in a different dimension. And for just one moment or two that they can come through and communicate with a person that's actually on the another dimension trying to reach out. To answer your question, I have to say, no, I haven't been able to prove it, what it is one way or the other, but I am really satisfied that it exists. And I've long ago quit trying to prove to the world that this exists. It's enough that I know it for myself. I will be happy to talk to anybody about it, and I try to be as helpful as I can.
Well, thank you, Dr. Proffit, and thank you for hanging out for the last hour.
It's been just a delightful experience talking with you.
Okay, my thanks to Carlos Cagina and Ryan White. Back next week with journalist David Menzies from Rebel News. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light, and what I say in a whisper, proclaim from the rooftops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Or at least up the stairs. Good night.